Welcome to my breakdown of episode 4 of season 3 of The White Lotus. The title of this week's episode, being Hide and Seek, really describes the true meaning of why some of our characters are in Thailand, because some of them are hiding from something bad and some of them are seeking a way to escape. As Rick shares his truth with Chelsea about why they're in Thailand, we see Belinda finds out who Gary really is. Meanwhile, we see our friend group seeking some fun outside the hotel that can lead to them in some unfamiliar places. We have a lot to discuss, so let's get into my breakdown of this episode, full spoilers ahead. We open with this incredibly beautiful shot into the hotel that seriously convinced me to add Thailand to my collection of places to visit one day because, man, this just looked amazing. But we see Jaclyn leaving Harrison, her husband of 1 year, voicemail as he hasn't been responding to any of her text messages. I wonder if Harrison is MIA because him and Jaclyn got into a big fight, which led her to making this surprise girls trip. Also feel like the show that she's famous for has or will be getting canceled sometime soon, and that also led to her getting the girls together to really get her mind off of what's going on back home. Remember, the episode is all about hiding and seeking. Now we see Belinda on the phone with her son Zion, who's on his way to see his mom, most likely in the next episode. Again, we see she hears something in the back of the room and still continues to ignore it. My best guess is it's probably one of those lizards that she was afraid of a couple episodes ago, or it could be a monkey that's stuck somewhere in her room and can't find its way out, but she's too afraid to see what it is. Now this could be being used as a metaphor for Belinda being too afraid to really come at Greg and ignoring her instincts, but as we see her eventually getting the courage to really confronting him and eventually seeing what's making that noise in her room. Now we see Timothy after taking a shower is taking his wife's pills, but you notice he's graduated from taking 2 pills in total last week to now he's taking 2 at once, but you also see he's taking them in such short windows of time. We saw that he took 1 during the afternoon of last week's episode and at night, and now he's taking 2 more in the morning, so if my math is correct, he's taken a total of 4 pills within a span of 24 hours, which I would imagine isn't safe for him to do, as we see how out of whack he was throughout this episode. Now cut to Mook and Gaidak as she invites him to watch her perform later in that evening, as he returns the favor and invites her to a date the following night. Now they don't have much time to talk about their day because he's got a meeting with one of his supervisors and Fabian about the robbery. Now Mook is happy for him because she believes he may be getting a promotion and that he may be getting added to the security team for Shatala's trip to Bangkok. Now in this meeting, we see Fabian starts off with complimenting Gaidak about his friendliness and being well liked amongst his peers and the guests, but he reminds him of the recent crime uptick on the island and his main job is protecting the people in the hotel. As P-League shows him how they're taking the security up another notch by having a gun on them, and he'll be showing him how to use it after work. So we know based on the opening scene of episode 1 of this season that a shootout's going to occur, and we can piece together that either P-League or Gaidak, or based on the ending of this episode, Timothy, will most likely be involved in that shootout, but the question is, which of those gentlemen will actually be involved? Now back with the Ratliffs, we see the effects of the pills that are taking its toll on Timothy as he complains about the noise from Saxton making a smoothie as he blames the jet lag, but we know those pills are definitely the reason for his drowsiness. Now Saxton forces Lochlan to drink his smoothie as we see Piper and Saxton continue their back and forth with each other as she shares her thoughts about jacked men.
No, girls aren't into super jacked guys, by the way.
To keep your phobias to yourself. And don't turn our little brother into an agender, asexual, like you.
Now in comes Victoria, who has noticed that her recently refilled lorazepams are missing and thinks that maybe one of the kids took them. As she shares that she takes the pills because it helps her with her anxiety, especially around strangers. Now the conversation pivots into her lack of anxiety when she's back home at the clubhouse with her friends, which sparks Timothy to subtly sharing his thoughts about potentially disliking his wife's friends. But we see Timothy stops himself from speaking even further, but those pills are definitely making him forgetful of his surroundings as he stretches and opens his legs, leaving his daughter and son to seeing his private parts. Now here we get our shot of what a lot of you all have spoken about since episode 1 of this season, as we see the 3 wise monkeys embodying the principle of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, which the 3 Ratliff kids are representing in this show. Now, speaking of 3s, we cut to Chelsea speaking of the things happening in 3s with the robbery and the snake show, and it leads her to thinking that she's going down a path of a Final Destination movie and that death is coming her way and she's afraid of going on this boat being her 3rd strike. Now, Rick's sudden trip to Bangkok comes up as Chelsea puts on the waterworks because Rick keeps her in the dark too much. Now, Rick continues to show that he actually does care for her in his own way as her on-demand tears of work as he agrees to join her on Gary's boat. Now, selfishly, I really hope that we get to learn more about how they met and who approached who in the situation, but I also hope that we eventually see Rick admit to her that she's made an impact on him for the better. Now, we check in with our friend group as Jaclyn's breaking the policy with her having her phone out in a no-phone zone as she's still checking to see if her husband will respond, and he still hasn't. We see Kate and Lori sharing a look at one another, one that said, yeah, there's definitely trouble in paradise with this newly married couple. As Jaclyn suggests that they do something fun for the day besides their yoga session, but secretly I bet it's to take her mind off of thinking about her husband. Now in comes Valentine, who's ready for their yoga session, but Jaclyn lets him know about the change of plans to having a day of fun, and she asks him for some advice, as they set their sights on a day of unknown fun. Now back with our couple, Chelsea goes to check on a worker who was also there during the robbery as we see Rick, or should I say Richard, runs into Amrita, who would love to set up another session with him. He tells her he's going to be busy for the next few days, so it's most likely that he's not going to see her again for the rest of the trip. As she tells him that he's touched her heart and leaves him with this.
You are not stuck. You understand? You can let go of your story. You can escape the karmic cycle. Find peace. In this life, I have hope for you.
Yeah.
She is such a kind person, and I really think those words will definitely come to have a big influence on him moving forward, especially if he ever gets a chance to come face to face with Jim. Now it's time to have some fun on the boat as we get the tunes in the background and we get this shot of the Rattler family all gathered together and to have some fun on Gary's boat with some hopefully decent people for Victoria's sake. Now, you all will take a notice of what Lochlan is wearing on this boat trip. Now, there seems to be some flowers on there. We got some alligators on there, which, by the way, alligators aren't local to Thailand. But the opening credits show a person being attacked by some underwater creatures. So could this be foreshadowing for Lochlan at some point this season being attacked or killed by a sea creature? We see Chloe welcoming the Rattler family on the boat and hugs Saxton while doing so as Gary introduces himself and Victoria immediately questions what he did before retiring as he tells her that he did some government work and some investing. Technically, he wasn't lying. He did work for the land management and he also invested time with Tanya before he killed her. As they head up to the lounge for some drinks, we see Victoria strategically hides her purse behind one of the pillows because you can never be too safe. Remember, you never know if you're around decent people. We see that Rick and Chelsea arrive, and we already know that Rick and Timothy have a history with each other, and I have a feeling that there's going to be more between them two at some point. Now, Timothy pretends to go to the bathroom, but we see he's a full-on addict at this point as he gets his wife's purse and he takes one of the pills, but he ultimately decides to take the whole bottle and put it in his pocket, and now we'll have a chance to pop these pills like candy. Now back with the ladies, we see them arriving to the festive spot outside of the hotel that was recommended to them as Jaclyn gets recognized by some fans. Now both of these ladies have recently become friends on this trip and both of them also have recently lost their husbands and they share this tragedy in common. Now speaking of common, we see Jaclyn realizes that something's off and notices that most of the people surrounding them are older people as Jaclyn says,
"What the actual fuck is this place? Is this like a bargain hotel for retirees?"
This scene was hilarious to me, but let's unpack this scene. Did Valentine do this on purpose because he sees them as older women and thought that they would enjoy being there? Or was this a part of his plans to get them to come back to him to find a place that doesn't fit into their comfort zone? I also feel that Jaclyn was projecting her inner thoughts on getting older, and being around all these older people goes back to all the work she had done to stay looking youthful and marrying someone younger, and she just hates the thought of getting older. Honestly, it could be a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, but either way, I definitely got a good laugh out of that scene. Now, catching up with Belinda and Punchai, she tells him about running into Greg and she knows that she remembers him. Now, this got me thinking about something kind of out of left field with this crazy theory here, and it's about the noises that she's hearing in her room. Now look, we know this season is all about religion and how Punchai share with her the beliefs of spirits being around them all the time. Could the noise that Belinda is avoiding be Tanya's spirit trying to speak to her from the afterlife? Now look, I know that's a wild theory to wrap your head around, but I don't think it's too crazy and think that that's what's potentially happening here because of the focus on spirits and religion and blessings and good luck and bad luck and all these things surrounding concepts beyond grounded logical reasoning. Now, back on the boat, Victoria takes notice of the guests and how they all share a lot of vibes of Gary's and Chloe's situation going on with a bunch of older men with younger women. Now, we don't spend a ton of time with Piper in this episode, but we do see her asking her younger brother for a favor, and that being his support during dinner. Now, at dinner, she's going to tell their parents that she's moving to Thailand after graduation to join the meditation center for at least a year. As we come to find out that the reason for them being in Thailand wasn't for her to interview some monk for her paper, but instead it was for her to get the reassurance she needed that this is where she wants to be, and she got that in last week's episode. Again, remembering the title of this is Hide and Seek, and she's seeking that reassurance that this is where she wants to be. Meanwhile, Saxon steals Locke away, and he wants him to join him into talking to some of the women on the boat as they make their move. Now, we get to meet some of these other guests on the boat as Rick gets an unwanted earful from a money mover, and Victoria and Tim meet a couple, and we see Victoria takes notice of Tim's odd behavior. Now, as she leaves, we get some character backstory from Timothy and this idea of him following in the footsteps of his grandfather, who was the governor of North Carolina, as well as his very successful businessman of a father. But again, we're reminded how much these pills have affected him as he shares too much information about his excitement of both of his parents being dead with some strangers that he just met. Now, lorazepam isn't known for being a truth-speaking pill, but again, like I mentioned last week, I think Timothy's at a point where he knows the storm back home is closing in on him, and he's just saying and doing whatever he wants at this point, regardless of how uncomfortable or how inappropriate it makes others feel. Now, we see Victoria goes to get the pills from her purse, but she sees that they're missing. Now, we see Piper trying to have a sweet moment with her father about him adapting to being in Thailand, but this moment's ruined because we know he's high as a kite as he takes this moment to being weird and starts grabbing on her face. Now, look, I wouldn't argue with anyone in the comments if you all read that scene with him saying his daughter was perfect and rubbed on her face as being an inappropriate moment or maybe even a sexual moment between the two, or at least from the father to his daughter. So let me know in the comments if you all took him as that just being affected by the pills and just being weird, or if it was more about him being inappropriate and touching and saying those things to his daughter. Meanwhile, we see Victoria shares the breaking news about her pills being stolen and how uncomfortable she feels being around the strangers. Now, during all this, we see Lochlan showing off his magic skills while Greg watches just how closely Saxton and Chloe are sitting next to each other. Now, we see Chelsea pulling Rick aside because of his attitude, and she wants him to let her in more to where he's at mentally, or else she's gone to make the decision to eventually leave him sooner rather than later. She wants to know why they're here in Thailand and what's going on in Bangkok, and she wants answers now. Look, I don't like to say I was right a lot, but remember what I said a couple weeks ago. Rick tells her that he's going to Bangkok in the morning, as we know that he's going there for Shatala and her husband, but it hit me in this moment, yet again, a crazy theory, stick with me. What if Jim, her husband, had something to do with his father being murdered and he's seeking revenge?
We're here because the fucking dude who murdered my father owns this hotel.
We find out that Rick's father came to Thailand to help people in need from Jim, who was stealing their land, but long story short, it got him killed. He doesn't have all the details, but his mom told him that Jim and maybe others were involved, but Jim was the main person behind it all. Now, Rick doesn't exactly know what he's going to say or do when he sees Jim face to face, but at least he's got this off his chest, and he felt comfortable enough to tell Chelsea, who doesn't run away or judge him after learning this, but instead she gives him a hug. Now, I just got a W, but followed that up with an L, because to me this also confirms that he wasn't involved in a robbery like I theorized a couple weeks ago, but now thinking what led them to Thailand makes all the previous scenes where we saw Rick being closed off and seeing like he had this negative cloud over him, it makes so much more sense now. Now back with the ladies, they return to the hotel and they steal Valentine from work and make him physically show them a good time. As they arrive to a spot outside the main tourist area, as he's taking them to a club later with some of his friends, but in the meantime, they're going to walk around and enjoy the locals with their water guns, which he tells them not to worry about. Now, for those wondering, this is something that indeed happens in Thailand. It's called the Thailand Sungrung Festival, which is famous for its water fights, which take place throughout the country in April. The water fights symbolize washing away bad luck and ushering in a new year. So knowing that, we see the ladies running away from their blessings instead of embracing it before heading into this unknown night with strangers. Now, talk about embracing. We see Belinda listens to her intuition and she Googles Tanya and sees all the reports about the millionaire's death from season 2. Notice off to the side where we see Tanya's net worth and her background, but more importantly, it shows Greg's name as her husband of 2 years. Now, she sees the reports of how Greg is wanted for questioning in Italy as she dives deeper and finds Greg's profile online where it shows his 27 years of service to the BLM, and she knows who Gary really is now. But the question is, what will she now do with this information? Now, back with the mastermind behind Tanya's death, he allows Chloe to take the boat while he tells her that he's got some business to attend back home, which was actually the same thing he said to Tanya back in season 2, and not much longer before he killed her. So does he plan to kill Belinda to make sure he got all the loose ends taken care of? Now we see Gregory/Greg having a drink with Timothy as he asks if he enjoys living in Thailand and tells Greg,
Heard someone say that anyone who moves to Thailand is either looking for something or hiding for something.
Neither. Just got sick of the rat race. So what about you?
Little do these men know they have more in common than they think because they both are hiding something that could be life-changing for the worse, and they're also seeking a way to escape. Now the daytime boat fun is over and it's now time for the after party as Saxon tells the rest of his family that him and Lochlan will be hanging back to enjoy the fun for the full moon celebration, which will be leaving Piper alone for dinner for herself for telling her parents the news. Now Rick tells Chelsea that even though they had their recent heart-to-heart that he's still going to Bangkok and he's seeking answers for the man who ruined his life since day one. As he leaves Chelsea behind to seek answers and confront the man his mother told him killed his father on her deathbed. Now the ladies are looking to turn their day around as they meet Valentine's friends Alexei and Vlad. Now I'm going to play detective here for a second. Now we didn't get to see the actual robber's face, but we did see the back of a taller gentleman's head. Could the big fella Vlad be the guy that we saw here? Again, connecting Valentine to the robbery as well. Now at dinner, we see Victoria making fun of her boat experience being full of con man and tax cheaters. She even makes a comment about how it wouldn't surprise her if some of those men were actually killers. Now, we all know she wasn't too far off because we know Greg is to be that, or at least had his hand in Tanya's death, but I did find it funny that she said that, yet she was okay with leaving both her sons on this boat of killers. Now, Victoria tells Piper how lucky she is to have a Boy Scout of a father as he leaves the table to get his phone from Pam. He sees all the unanswered messages on his phone and he sees there's no escaping from what's back home waiting for him. Here we see Belinda and Greg/Gary share another stare off, but this time around she doesn't look away, but she looks him straight in the eye and basically says, "I got my eye on you now." We see Godot gets the gun for target practice ready as Mook shows him her outfit for her performance coming up. Now Mook looks amazing by the way, but we see her getting walked out by Godot and he leaves the gun unattended. Now I don't want this to be true, but I know some of you all think that she might have had something to do with the robbery. Now her distracting him in this moment I think is a coincidence, but him leaving the gun unattended could point to the idea that he's so caught up in her presence that she's secretly hiding her true identity, and him not knowing her involvement in a robbery could be an interesting twist. Now back with Timothy, he finds out that Kenny cut a deal with the feds and his lawyer suggests that he pled guilty and cut a deal as well. It's on the table that maybe Timothy will have to go serve a few months in federal prison, but he tells Chuck that he'll rather die than spend a second in prison. Did Timothy just submit himself as our #1 candidate to die at the end of this season? Now after he hangs up on Chuck, he begins having a mini panic attack and he sees the gun on Gydok's office that he left out. Now, as Goddoc heads back to his post and walks past Timothy, he notices that the gun is missing and he has his own little mini panic attack. But my question is now, what exactly will Timothy do with this gun? As we end this episode with seeing Rick boarding his flight to Bangkok, as Timothy returns back to the table and pretends that he's not scared out of his mind and running off of lorazepam all of his system, as he also has a gun in his pocket. By the way, they made it a point to show us that there are cameras always on, so I would imagine Goddoc will see the footage and know that Timothy was actually the one that took the gun. We see Greg back at his place on the top of the hill as he goes to Belinda's Instagram and sees her with Zion, and he sets his plans for her and her son. Now, does his plans include kidnapping Belinda or taking Zion as a ransom and as a threat to not tell anyone about his past, or will he attempt to put a hit on her and to make sure that she won't tell anyone about his secret? As we end with our last shot back on the boat, we see Chelsea, Chloe, Saxton, Lochlan, and others having drinks, about to have some fun into the night. Which I could be wrong, but I think this might be the first time, at least for this season, that we don't necessarily end an episode with our characters going to bed into the nighttime scenes, which makes me think that we'll most likely open next week's episode with our ladies at the club. We're going to be back on the boat at the nighttime party, and Piper tells her parents about her plans after her graduation. To me, this was a much better episode than last week's, in my opinion. I thought the pacing was great in this episode. We finally find out what Rick was hiding, as well as Belinda now knowing Greg's identity and him being involved with Tanya's death. Now, I'll admit, I'm not entirely sure what Timothy's game plan is with him now taking that gun, unless he plans on doing something very stupid with the gun, like attempting his own robbery to assure he has money in his accounts, or at least having some valuable assets to his possession before his family recognizes their accounts have been emptied. Now, Rick going to Bangkok is really interesting to me because we clearly know that Rick has an attitude and has an anger problem, and I don't imagine a man in Jim's position will openly admit to murder or at least being involved in murder, and he will be okay with Rick walking away alive with this information that can land him in prison. So there's definitely nothing good that's going to come out of that confrontation. Now, we didn't see the friend group ending at taking shots at each other like we saw in the previous episodes, but Jaclyn's desperation to getting her mind off her husband and hanging with those strangers doesn't seem like it's going to be a good idea neither. So overall, the execution behind the title of this week's episode being hide and seek really worked for me here, because we're seeing how each group of characters has one person leading them down a path of destruction, whether that's Rick or Greg and Timothy. It's just really compelling to me. Meanwhile, we have our other supporting characters who are searching for themselves or trying to break out of their shell, like Goddoc, or having someone like Lochlan or Piper, or even the women group looking for something that's other than what's in front of them, has been fun to watch so far. So I now have a feeling that the table is officially set and things are about to get wild starting in next week's episode. So there you have it. That is the end of this week's breakdown of episode 4 of season 3 of The White Lotus. Now, if you all are still here at this point in the video, shout out to you all. You are the real MVPs. I appreciate the support. Do me a favor, put in the comments right now, #HideAndSeek. Now, getting to my favorite part of covering this show, and that's reading you all's comments. Let me know your deeper meanings, your favorite moments, things that didn't work for you all in this episode, but also talk about what you think about Tim. What is he going to do with the gun? Will Gregory attempt to do something bad to Belinda or her son? Will Rick actually confront Jim, and will he hurt him? Or will Jim have a newfound appreciation of life after his health scare and admit to his wrongs in his past? And of course, 4 episodes in, who do you all think is our top candidate of dying at the end of this season? If you all enjoyed this week's breakdown, do me a favor, hit that like button. Let's try to get this video over 1,500 likes. Please consider sharing this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about The White Lotus. And last but not least, if you all are watching this for the first time, this is your first time on the channel, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed yourself. Consider sticking around by checking out my other videos and subscribing to the channel today. And if you all want to take the support even further, you all can join the channel memberships, which can be found in the description of this video. Don't forget, you all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll see you all on the next video.